Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel session on strategy building commercial infrastructure in the U.S. So, the the focus, of course, of this morning session is really getting the perspective and getting some insights on how an Asian-based medical technology company, small or large, can scale in the U.S. And we have an outstanding panel this morning, and I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Fredrik Nyberg. I'm the managing director for Medtech Innovator, based here in Singapore. But let me just very quickly let you know who is on our panel. They will introduce themselves in just a moment. So we have Ken Nelson here, angel investor, partner at Medtech Advantage Fund. He's had a number of really interesting exits that are relevant for today's conversation, so he'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. Honored to have Dave Uffer here as well, one of the most best networked individuals that I know in the medtech space in North America. So we'll get Dave to introduce himself as well. He's managing director for medtech at Trinity Lifesciences. Last but certainly not least, good to have Dr. Weronika Michaluk here based in Miami and working now at HTD Health. So I'll get each of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into the topic: strategy and commercial infrastructure needed to scale medtech in the US. And maybe Ken, I'll start with you. Just a brief introduction, and then we'll go into the topic.
Ken Nelson. I'm a partner and co-founder in the Medtech Advantage Fund. The Medtech Advantage Fund will be investing exclusively in Medtech Innovator alumni companies. Medtech Innovator is the largest medical device, digital health, and diagnostics startup accelerator in the world. We also have an Asia Pacific branch, which Fredrik runs. Prior to that, started my med device career with Guidant first in cardiac rhythm management, so implantable pacemakers, defibrillators, then Boston Scientific post that. And then the back half of my career, I built the teams, the cultures, the infrastructures for what have become 3 of the 4 largest digital health diagnostics and monitoring companies on the cardiac side, cardiac wearable side. First was iRhythm, which eventually went public. The second was biotelemetry, which got acquired by Philips, and then the third was Barty, which is where I went through MedTech Innovator and actually went through the LSI program, and that was acquired by Hillrom and Baxter. So and those I was led the commercial teams for all 3 of those.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Ken. Dave, please.
Hi, Dave Uffer. I'm the managing director of the MedTech practice for Trinity Lifesciences. It's a 1,200-person global advisory firm doing strategy, data and analytics. My co-managing director was the previous panelist, Deepak Sahu, who we've been partnered together in 2 different firms for about 8 years. I've been in medtech myself 35 years, and that's why Fredrik says I might know a lot of folk. You go to events like this and you get to meet a lot of people and you stay active. My first 25 years was in very large corporate strategy and business development, commercialization through companies that I'm sure everybody is well known with Abbott Labs, Boston Scientific, Covidien, Medtronic, and so forth. And I transitioned about 10 years ago into the other side of the house, advising companies who would look to build out commercial infrastructure, get product to market, and then eventually either IPO or likely be acquired by those large companies.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Hello, I'm Weronika Michaluk, MedTech practice lead at HTD Health, biomedical engineer by training, started career as an engineer in Poland, then moved to South Korea where I was a neuroscientist, researcher, and after that time moved to Miami, Florida, where I worked for also Boston Scientific, was in charge of digital health, cross-division, and remote support. Then had a period of working in Barcelona, Spain, also for Boston Scientific, for EMEA region. And for the last 4 years, I've been leading MedTech practice at HTD Health. And at HTD, we are strategy technology consultancy company. So we support different size of organizations from startups all the way to corporations to build successfully their digital health and software medical device solutions. And we are especially good at in interoperability, so making sure that the devices are actually interconnected and work well in the healthcare ecosystem, and also designing and building best-in-class usable digital health solutions for both patients and clinicians.
Great, thank you so much. So, Ken, maybe let me start with you. A lot of Asian-based medtech companies don't necessarily think of the pathway to an exit when they're thinking about entering the US. But given your experience involved in 3 exits, you were most recently, if I remember correctly, Chief Commercial Officer at Bardi Diagnostics, acquired for close to $500 million by Hillrom a few years ago. What's needed when scaling in the US, what's needed if you want to plan for an ultimate trade sale exit in the US, in your view?
I think the most important thing is to make sure you're wearing a white shirt with blue checks, and I think Dave would probably agree.
Agree?
Anybody get the joke? He's wearing the same shirt. Anyway, I thought it was funny.
I don't think
but no,
anyone can see it from the back.
I
but it's
think the one thing that people don't concentrate on enough is reimbursement pathway, making sure that there are either established codes or there's good pathway to establish codes. I think the U.S. is a great market to really drive initial revenue with the company, so to show strong adoption. And I think that starts with finding things like the accelerator programs. MedTech Innovator is an example of one. And then just trying to come to events like LSI where you can network across the entire startup ecosystem and find potential acquirers. So it's really going to events like this and getting your network just expanded.
right. And if we just stay with that thought for a second, you're all given your role as Chief Commercial Officer. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you built that commercial organization for Bardi Diagnostics.
Yeah, so great question.
From scratch.
I think recruiters become a very important part of the process. I think, at least for me, I was fortunate that I had a foundation with Guidant and Boston Scientific that had a really amazing culture. And so trying to find the right people, especially those early people to help you commercialize. So finding those people who can be player coaches, really, really important. I think as a company coming from outside the US, finding people that have established relationships, either to add somebody to your board or add somebody as an advisor, and then getting those people who can get that early adoption, which is so important.
Yeah.
And then going to the industry events. For me, my background was cardiac, so going to American Heart Association and Heart Rhythm Society, really, really important to get those early key opinion leader adopters, which then they go on to speak at these events and do the clinical studies, get that clinical evidence that's going to really help you scale in the long run.
That's helpful, Ken. Thanks. Dave, I know you've been working with large numbers of medtech companies, large and small, both in the US as well as outside of the US. What are some of the challenges, and where sometimes do these companies fall short when it comes to scaling in the US? What are the challenges and the problems that you typically where you need to come in and assist them or support them as an advisor?
The first failure is not to get deep and intimately involved in the market to understand how the market operates. Just as Ken was mentioning, first off is to understand reimbursement. And that's the same thing in any market, whether you're going to go to France, Italy, Australia, or the US. See, too many people look from outside and try to understand it inside. We can talk about 100 different ways to get in and learn the market. But even from a payer schematic, it's reimbursement in one regard, but there's a ton of different schematics for payment, whether you have a Kaiser Permanente that it's not about reimbursement. They have a captive audience and they just look to save money for their system while providing care. Or you have different government versus private insurers versus value-based healthcare organizations. This is not to scare anybody, but to say there's ways to learn how to commercialize, and that's just on the payment side. How are you going to set up your commercial organization from a sales standpoint? There is really no turnkey approach and strategy, but you have to understand how your product's going to get into market the most efficient way, whether it's very targeted or broad. And I see people fail, even U.S. companies, startups, fail that and then have to retrench. And it's time and money that is wasted, and it's too precious to make those few mistakes. Of course, you go to limited marketed release to hone your pitch, to understand your market a little bit better so you don't go broad and fail big and broad, but you still can be much more efficient when you get in there and understand that market. On the stand-up of the organization, I say there's no one solution. As Ken, you were asking, if you're setting yourself up, whether it's IPO, you want to be standalone to get to $500 million, or you like to exit, I always advise people work from your endpoint, your objective, and come backwards.
Yeah.
And what you need to do to be able to attract and acquire is very different depending on what your business, your technology, and what the acquirers would be looking for. And some want to just say, you get to X dollars and show me that you could do it in 5 accounts, and we'll take it with 5 reps, and we'll take it to our 150 people and go broad. So again, understand your local market, enlist advisors that can help you, and be there. You have to be there.
Great advice. We'll come back to some of those points in a moment. I wanted to get Weronika's perspective here as well. Obviously, your focus is very much on the area of software as a medical device, digital health, connected devices, and so on. In what respect are those types of technologies different when it then comes to planning to scale a business in the US, especially maybe for you maybe have that perspective being European living in the US. For a non-US company coming to the US with those particular types of innovations and technologies, how is that different from what do those types of companies need to think about as they scale in the US?
Great question, and I would like to talk about a couple of different points, because even Fredrik, we talked about it before the panel, that, like when you enter the US market, I would say, yes, is centralized and decentralized from different topics, right? So for example, in Asia, like in Singapore or China, you have more government-led, markets, and in US, you have so many different health systems. But yes, we have one, notified body, would say, the FDA, one agency that will then give you the clearance or approval. When it comes to software as a medical device or connected devices, when you enter the US market, it's so important to understand that you should think about and plan ahead about the interoperability, because it's not just about designing and building standalone product, but making sure that it actually works well within the clinicians and patient workflows, and also that it really adds the value. So just planning ahead and creating the strategy for the interoperability is super important, because I call it kind of like, it's also the bigger you get, the more difficult it is, and the more customizable you have to be, because each health system, they have their own EHR, electronic health records. And then every institution, they have their own instances. So maybe we go very deep technical, but in order to integrate and get access to patient data in each and every health system, you have to understand not only their technical requirements, but also how they work, how they collaborate day to day. So just kind of like planning ahead is super important. And then also, because we are in the software space, in the medtech, I would say it's relatively new comparing to the traditional hardware medical devices. So we don't have all of the regulations and standards yet. So FDA recently released new guidance for cybersecurity, for AI. So if you are in the software space, you have to keep up to date with all of the new things happening. So we are in very exciting times, but you just have to stay agile and be open for the change and just keep up to date.
Great point. And I would want to just to stay with you for a second, Weronika, because it obviously we'll speak about traditional medical device commercial infrastructure setups in more detail in just a moment. But um, a device company typically would work with distributors, build sales offices, a direct sales force. Um, uh, how are channel partners different when you're working on a mobile app or just a pure digital health platform? And how do you scale that? What are the types of local partners across the US that a startup venture in digital health, say, or in a software as a medical device innovation is working on?
Yeah, so great point again. So normally, as you mentioned, in the traditional medical device, you would have a sales team, you would have distributors. In software, um, you don't have physical, let's say, even issues with like supply chain. So we don't focus on the supply chain. We don't sell hardware devices because there is nothing. Everything is in the cloud.
Right.
So I would say kind of your warehouse, if you will, would be these cloud solution providers. So one of the channel partners would be cloud solutions, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, or others, and then making sure that it's actually stored securely. So in the warehouse, for example, right, you would take care of your hardware devices to be stored securely. In the same in the cloud. And even I would say more difficult because everything must be really taken care of when it comes to cybersecurity. There is lots of patients data. If you want to again connect to EHR systems like Epic, Cerner, MyChart, that would be also your channel partners, I would say, because there is patient data stored there. So maybe we are not focusing so much on the supply chain, in the software, but like cloud and EHR is definitely something very
Yeah.
important.
And I guess the business model would influence the commercialization strategy as well. A B2C mobile app is going to be a vastly different approach from something like a B2B to C potentially.
Correct, yes. And like there's more and more mobile applications, but we have to, how many mobile apps you have on your phone? I have a lot. So you also, just making sure that we build the ones that is usable and friendly for patients. So that is something we should definitely think about. And one more thing that, the subscription model is very popular, I would say, in the software space. But what I've been seeing that more and more traditional medical device companies like Medtronic, for example, also wants to like enter the subscription-based model. It may be not so easy because there's a lot of like data governance involved, but I think the future is bright when it comes to this. So I would say let's see what the future will bring.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Ken, you mentioned earlier the benefit of being part of an accelerator. As someone, if startup venture is looking to scale, whether a local US company or a company from outside of the US, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your experience there, because I know that before you exited Bardi Diagnostics, you are in fact a MedTech Innovator alum.
Yeah, so I think the role that the earlier stage incubators play is really, really important. And then as companies get further along, trying to get into the bigger accelerators like a MedTech Innovator, also really important. I wish I'd known about it 2 startups prior. I would have, been that much more educated and had a much better network earlier. But in terms of finding consultants on the regulatory side and on the reimbursement side and finding other recruiters to help you find that commercial team, it's all so important. And then also getting introduced to the hospital-based venture funds. And, I just think the time and effort that you spend trying to do all that on your own is impossible. So getting into something like MedTech Innovator, and then again, once those companies go through the accelerators and they're going to raise capital, spending the money and taking the time and effort to come to things like LSI are also really important to expand that network out, and it'll just help you scale faster.
Oh.
So I think it's absolutely critical. I think some of them take equity, so it's a challenge, and people don't want to do that. MedTech Innovator doesn't do that. It's a nonprofit. They give away non-dilutive funding. So if you can find ones like that that are reputable, very, very much worth it. And then I wouldn't stop there. We did programs after MedTech Innovator as well. I did Health Tech Arkansas, which is now HardX, also really important in terms of getting clinical studies done. But I think it's just important, even just to network with other founders going through the same types of things that you are as either a commercial person or a CEO or COO that's going through the program. Sometimes talking to other people going through the same thing is just a helpful thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. So Dave, maybe let's talk a little bit more about your experience working with smaller companies and helping them build that commercial infrastructure in the US. A question very often we hear from startups that are based outside of the US saying, well, I really need to set up a legal entity. I need to build my own team on the ground in the US. How important is that? Is that absolutely mission critical, or is that something that can come a little bit later on as a company evolves and start to build their presence there?
As far as a legal entity, I'm not going to say that that's a requirement. I really don't see that as an absolute necessity. There are some disadvantages, obviously, the cost and the governance of the organization, and it takes a little bit more of governance over that, who's in charge and who's going to be set up, and the cost. It's really not too cost prohibitive. You have some law firms that'll go out an infomercial for somebody like McDermott that lectures around the world, and we're going to give you the playbook when you literally need to execute that. We'll help you and do that. So it's not so difficult. But there are certain investors that would be precluded from investing in foreign entities, and that's U.S. or even Europe. So they do require a local entity, and some just want to be close to the senior management to be able to see up close what they're doing, how they're acting, how they're executing. And then others want that full founder-led org to be established. So I've seen companies that will, the CEO will go locate for a period of time into the market, or at least have maybe a president of a foreign entity to operate there. And again, as we started the discussion, I was saying before, just to be in that infrastructure and you're understanding the environment that you're operating in is so critical.
I do think, and you mentioned this a little bit, I do think it's really important that they establish at least a U.S. subsidiary. You don't have to flip the headquarters here or to the U.S., but you do need to establish some sort of subsidiary, or you're going to really limit yourself in terms of the U.S. investors.
For sure.
Especially now, I feel like for whatever reason, post-COVID, it's become kind of a requirement to have a subsidiary for a lot of these VCs.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for that. And I think that's something else that's very often top of mind on, especially medtech startup companies in Asia Pacific. Do I need to flip my organization? Do I need to relocate my headquarters to the US as I'm scaling and building infrastructure? And obviously you also now wear the investor hat, Ken, and maybe you can expand a little bit more on that.
I mean, so I'm on several boards of companies outside the U.S., and a lot of them have either established U.S. subsidiaries or actually done the flip to the headquarters in the U.S. And I think you don't have to go through the effort to flip the headquarters over. That's a lot. And some people want to keep their R&D or parts of the business wherever they started, which also I think makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do think having some sort of entity, especially if you're trying to get major U.S. investors on the venture side, you need to have some sort of a U.S. subsidiary.
Yeah. Great point. Weronika, as you work with startups in digital health, SAMD, other connected devices from outside the US, what What are some of the typical stumbling blocks that they come across that are unique to those types of technologies? And how do you go about helping them?
So there are many, especially depends from where you're coming from, but definitely what we also mentioned before is the US typical, just like the structure, the health systems, and just understanding that again, this interoperability is so important, and making sure that you think about it from day one. And the other thing is like reimbursement. So lots of organizations, especially startups, they just want to like develop amazing, great looking products. But I would say it's so important to think about reimbursement and your like commercial strategy from day zero, I would say. And in software, sometimes there's no CPT codes for, for
Right.
specific connected digital health software solution. That even adds to this complexity. So I would say to even like have, if you want to enter US market, to have US based advisors like the entity, or subsidiary, definitely, but also find this, people that were there that are experienced in US and can guide you for the reimbursement, for the interoperability from day one.
Yeah.
And even from a clinical study protocol design
Definitely.
standpoint, I think sometimes people design the study just to get FDA clearance, but really they should be designed to not only get clearance, but also get coverage.
Definitely, yes.
And if they don't do that, then you could be, wasting lots of time and money having to do a secondary or third study because you didn't get that consultant to help with the protocol design.
Fully agree.
Not only coverage, the biggest thing I've been looking at in investors when we were raising capital for some companies is your health economics.
Yeah.
And what we didn't see people doing was building in the health economics. We're advising them to build the health economics even into the initial stages of the design of the company. But for sure, in the clinical trials, had a company come to me and said, we need to do a health economics study. And if they had buried those endpoints into their initial trial, all the data would have been there. And it was another $1.4 million just to do a health economic trial.
Great point. And Dave, I was going to ask you, I mean, given your current, you've been in past senior roles in providing market access advisory services to companies. For a startup, medtech startup that's based outside of the US, what should they think about when they evaluate a potential advisor or consulting firm in the US in the area of market access and commercialization or reimbursement or health economics even?
There's there's no shortage of providers in the market. Obviously, cost, and you have to find out the right organization, the right cost. So always get at least three people to talk to be able to look because it's quite variable. Now, some are scaled for much larger organizations. Some are scaled for smaller startups. Our price point at Trinity is about a third of the big box McKinsey types. Um, but we are so overpriced for early startups, and I refer to small shops all the time that don't have the infrastructure, nor do they need the type of work with the fidelity that we're doing for when we advise a Stryker or a Baxter. So understand who's scaled for your operation, what your needs are. And then, as Ken was mentioning, we've got a large industry, but a small ecosystem. And folks like the MedTech Innovator and other accelerators, we saw one kick off the other night. That's getting yourself into the ecosystem, and you find the appropriate ones. You have to find them with domain experience, not a MedTech advisor for reimbursement, but somebody that has done your technology before and understands those nuances. And they're there, but you have to be able to get people to help point those out that have deep experience in your specific clinical or technological sector.
Great point, Dave. Thank you for that. I'm realizing we are getting short on time, so I'm going to ask each panelist to just give a few closing words, final advice that any of you may have to our audience of typically Asia Pacific headquartered medical technology startups. And maybe Ken, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think two things. One, you may think you're too far along to join an accelerator. That's not necessarily true. We were raising a $35 million Series B, already had FDA clearance. We already started commercializing when I went through MedTech Innovator, and it was extremely helpful. The other thing I'll say is you're here at LSI Asia. If you really want to be commercializing in the US, you should also come to LSI in Dana Point, because you're going to have even more people from the US that can help you. But it's worth the time, the effort, and the money to go to these types of things to find the right people to help you.
Great point.
Yeah, I would say you have your direct hires, you have your part-time hires, you have your different advisory boards. But I'd say everybody here at this conference should be a resource to you. Everybody, every conversation will have something to help you along this journey. It's not easy, but you're not alone. And as you were saying, CEO-only events, I hosted one in Australia last week, and they were just fascinated about how they can find the ways to help each other and have some of the same experience and challenges that they can help solve for each other. Use your resources in the ecosystem. Everybody's here to make a good industry and help each other.
I would definitely agree, and would add, like medtech is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So we have to be patient, stay agile, be persistent, but also, if you want to enter to US market that is new for you, look for partners, look for people that have been there and have done this, like have been in this field for many years, have done some errors that, mistakes that you will not make thanks to their experience. So I would say, if you want to go far, go with like good, great partners that have been there.
Great advice. Thank you very much. On that note, we will wrap up. Do catch our three panelists during the break. They have a lot more information on entering the US, but